Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Wyoming artist and writer Nick Thornburg illuminates relationships between objects commonly held in opposition and probes deep into the meaning and practice of creativity. His art is a result of uninhibited exploration, tempered with experience. It reveals timelessness and transition. We'll meet the artist and writer next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
And it's our pleasure to be joined on this Wyoming Chronicle with Lander writer and artist Nick Thornburg. Nick, welcome to Wyoming Chronicle. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
Nick, you live in Lander, and we're going to get a chance during our show today to see some of your wonderful work. But let's learn a little bit about you and your background. Where did you grow up?
I'm originally from southeast Iowa, from a little town called Mount Pleasant. And that's, I grew up on a little small hobby farm outside of town, had a great outdoor upbringing, a lot of opportunity to explore and use my imagination. And then eventually I stayed in Iowa for my education, went to the University of Iowa, and then branched out from there after that.
Mount Pleasant seems like an oxymoron in Iowa to me.
It is. We get a lot of questions about that. And I, for the life of me, could not explain it to you.
So why Lander?
My partner was working for Knowles, and she asked me to move out. And so I took the opportunity to come out and check it out for myself to see if it would actually be a feasible situation for me as a creative and as an artist. And it turns out it is. It's a great community to be an artist and writer in.
And what about your art background, Nick? When did you realize that you really either really enjoyed it or were really gifted?
Sure. Yeah, I would say I've always been a fairly creative person. Growing up, having to use my imagination out on the farm. We were fairly isolated. We didn't have television. We didn't have access to internet or anything like that. So, much of my time had to be taken up by either as chores, working on the farm, or as using my imagination and learning and things like that. And so I think that really set the tone for my future, where I just really enjoyed exploring and learning and trying new things and creating things with my hands. And so that carried over into a career.
Was there a time where you started to draw or started to paint and really, man, I like this?
Yeah, no, I was always a drawer. I was always an illustrator. Is one of the things that is kind of one of my go-to activities. If I wasn't reading, I was probably drawing something of some sort. For a long time when I was young, I thought I was going to be something like a cartoonist. I really loved Calvin and Hobbes, and so I thought I would be something like an artist like Bill Watterson. So he was my hero. And then actually, I had an aunt who lives in Great Falls, Montana, which is the home to the Charlie Russell Museum, and we would take summer trips out to visit her and to explore the West. And it was on one of those trips where I got to see the work of Charlie Russell. And that was a bit of an eye-opening moment for me, being exposed. It was probably one of the first art museums that I'd ever been to. And just seeing the dynamic compositions and the characterizations and the color and just all these exciting compositions. It was just a really exciting time. And kind of from that moment on, I always had it in the back of my mind. It's like, well, painting may be my new love here.
We'll get a chance to see your beautiful work again here in just a moment, but we were talking briefly about Lander. It's become somewhat of an artist mecca in my mind. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I moved out to Wyoming, I was coming from Iowa City, Iowa, which is a large university town, has a huge arts community, especially within the writing field, a lot of writers there. And so I was certainly very nervous about moving to a small town in Wyoming. I wasn't entirely sure what my opportunities would be, or if there would be other people who did things or who saw things in the same way that I did, or who used their creativity in ways that I would connect to. And when I came out here on a visit, I was just really blown away. There are so many working artists here in the community. There are a lot of community members who have a high level of interest in using their own creativity, but also who are interested in supporting the arts in general. And so the community as a whole is incredibly supportive of people who are looking to use their creativity and use that as a career.
We can't leave this time, I think, without talking about how the pandemic has impacted artists and others. How have you found, Nick, that it's impacted either you or your community?
Yeah, I think communities all over the country have been pretty severely impacted in general. But in the arts community, I know it's been especially hard. Within the visual arts field, where artists who, say, for example, are painters or illustrators or sculptors, much of their livelihood depends on actually having an exhibition that people can come and experience firsthand. So that means actually going to the organizations, going into galleries, and having that one-on-one relationship with that work of art. And so in a time of physical distancing, where businesses are essentially forced to close, suddenly all of those opportunities are just off the table. And so I know a number of artists, myself included, who have had shows that are either canceled or indefinitely delayed, which is hard if you're a working artist and that is your source of income. So it highlights, just this pandemic really highlights some of the vulnerabilities that those in the arts community have to live with every day. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm working on my current project along with Western painter Luke Anderson, which is an online art exhibition, which we're trying to introduce elements of interactivity and immersion into the web experience in such a way that it helps perhaps to replace some of that experience that is lost when we can no longer go into the gallery.
You've worked very hard to promote other artists, and on your website, you can see your writings about them. How did that idea come about to kind of give other artists a lift?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm a firm believer in the idea that the rising tide raises all ships. And as creatives and as artists, although some people might assume that we are always in competition with each other, that's largely not the case, because everybody is so unique in what it is that they produce. And the opportunities are just so wide that there's no real reason for people to have a sense of jealousy or envy or competition to such a degree that they wouldn't want to help somebody else out. So really, at the end of the day, helping somebody else out, helping them with their own careers, is really going to help raise the regional art scene tide. And, as a result, that'll help everybody out. And so, yeah, it just started as that kind of idea. I wanted a project. I was really interested in starting a more of a long form writing project for myself. And it just seemed like a perfect opportunity to have something for myself to work on as an interesting intellectual project, but also something that could really give back to my arts community and hopefully inform the wider community of what it is the regional arts scene really offers.
And really meet and understand other artists?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, it's very easy for people to perhaps go back on particular tropes about what it means to be an artist or who artists are. But everybody, it's like everybody is so different, and everybody's so unique, and everybody has their own way of working, and everybody has their own unique ways of contributing. And so I really wanted that series to highlight those contributions while adding to the wider conversation about regional creativity.
I think it's a wonderful project. So how do you work? We see a studio setting kind of right behind you. What is your day? What does Nick do when he gets up in the morning relative to your great art?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I as far as it depends on the project that I'm working on. So if I'm working on, say, getting ready for an exhibition or a show, and I'm working on visual art pieces, a lot of my day starts with getting myself into a particular headspace that allows me to get into the actual work. So I'll start with some reading and some study, some warm-ups, which are essential, and then
warm-ups in what way? What does an artist do to warm up?
Yeah, well, drawing exercises, brush exercises, things of this nature. So yeah, many people don't understand this about artists, or especially with visual artists. A lot of the things that visual artists do in the studio can kind of be equated to something that like an athlete might do. So an athlete is not going to just jump out on the field and sprint for 100 yards and perform at 100%. They've got to go through a process of getting their body and their mind in a particular place so that they can actually perform when they need to.
Our viewers right now are seeing a piece that you call Duality 1. Tell us about it.
So this is the first in a series, the Duality series. And this series is entirely made with charcoal on paper. And the idea behind this series is really to highlight the theme of duality in our everyday lives. And so in this particular piece, what we see is a skull, a bighorn skull. And what I'm really trying to do with these pieces is to have a direct confrontation with the viewer with this particular piece. So many people may look at a skull and think about, say, for example, death. And so when we think about the concept of death, that is in itself a kind of duality, life and death. And additionally, we have kind of the composition is such that there's a lot of high level of contrast, lights and darks, which are another duality. And so, there's other things, kind of hardness and softness and all these different elements that I try to infuse within these particular pieces, so that as people come to them and sit in front of them, the idea is that they're almost like a contemplative piece where they sit and they can think and they can kind of let the piece absorb their thoughts and kind of just observe what it is that comes through their mind. But the idea is here, again, like I mentioned earlier, with the idea of trying to highlight particular narratives in our own lives, I wanted to highlight the specific quality of how we approach dualities in our life.
My favorite, Emergence, your Emergence series.
That is, certainly one that a lot of people respond to. I just wanted to use these pieces in the Emergence series to really highlight the relationship that people have with with the wildlife that we can find all around us here in the regional West, and hopefully maybe approach them in a little bit more of a contemplative light, which, like the Duality series, highlight this kind of particular idea that we have of separating things into very distinct, unique, and diverse categories, when our relationships are actually a lot more nuanced and there's a lot more gray in our own relationships with the world around us.
The buffalo is mesmerizing to me, and especially when you think about its history in the West.
Absolutely.
It's just, I can't turn away from it, quite frankly. I can't turn away from it. Then a different piece you shared with us, Shooter.
So Shooter is a piece. It depicts a mounted rider atop a horse. He's getting ready to shoot his gun. That piece was actually part of a show that I did at Lander Art Center, one of my first solo exhibitions. And that particular show was separated into a number of different segments, but the overarching theme had to do with the myth of the American West. And so in this particular section, I really wanted to highlight some of the cultural elements that we're very familiar with, not only as residents in the West, but even the world over. And so the cowboy is an iconic image of the West. And so I really wanted to get people to sit and contemplate and think about what it actually means to them when they're confronted with this particular figure. It is a little bit darker, has a little bit more abstraction to it, with a lot of spatter and random brush marks and things like that. The character himself is in shadow, a little bit more mysterious. So it leaves it open for interpretation. And hopefully what that will do also is kind of highlight the mechanisms within each and every viewer. So whether they take it as a positive image, or a negative image, or a frightening image, or a mysterious image, or something that's cool, hopefully when they observe how it is that they actually respond to that image, that will allow them a certain level of self-awareness about how it is certain things within our cultural narratives actually make their impression upon us as people.
Then we have longevity. What were you thinking about when you drew this?
So longevity, depicts a bison skull in a little bit more of, less in a traditional manner and a little bit more of a modernist approach. And so again, it's kind of a direct confrontation with the viewer, but done in lighter tones and brighter tones. And it's really, the title kind of reflects what it is I found when I started studying a lot of different cultural artifacts and cultural symbolism, wherein skulls are actually, whereas in the modern age, we kind of come across skulls and we're one of the first things that we think about is death, something that is a little bit scary perhaps, or something that we're not really interested in really thinking too hard about. But in many traditions across the world, actually, the skull has traditionally been seen as a symbol of longevity, because it is among the last things that remains of a body after it does pass away. And so for many cultures across the world, it actually holds a kind of a reverence and almost a kind of magic, or at least some form of celebratory implications, because it is something that has remained even after that being has passed on. And so I wanted people to kind of observe this iconic animal in the bison, and really just contemplate those same things and those same issues and what it means in their own lives.
Do you enjoy people looking at your art? Do you enjoy watching them look at your art?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually quite rewarding when you're able to be there when somebody observes your art. One of the things that I always like to do when people are going around and looking at art is I tell them, as you're looking at something, or I let them look at my piece or the pieces that I have hanging, and then I say to them, well, think about the piece that you most connect to. And usually there's always one in any collection or any exhibition that really connects to you personally. So I asked viewers to think about that, and then I asked them to go back to that piece, observe it again, and think about the reasons why that piece is actually meaningful to them. And if they think deeply about it, and they kind of observe what it is that they're feeling, what you'll discover is that there is a story behind that. And the reasons for the kind of the meaning and the meaning that we have, the meaning making and the connection, is that there is something that we've ingrained in ourselves, some form of narrative that actually creates that connection. And so it's always very rewarding to watch people observe pieces and then to come back and discuss these things with them, because a lot of them actually come back with some very interesting observations, really interesting personal stories that these pieces have brought up in their own minds. So it's always very rewarding.
Nick, our viewers now are looking at Ceres and the Garden of the World. What is this?
So this particular piece was a play off of Ceres, who is a Greek and Roman goddess of the harvest, essentially. And this particular piece was part of a wider collection that was really about some of the iconography that was found during the times of westward expansion. And during those times, a lot of classical iconography and classical symbolism was used in the nation, in the country. And in some ways, even the character of Ceres was used in write-ups or in advertisements that encourage people to come west, because she has this kind of strong symbolist element to her. The idea that going out, so they're using the same kind of symbolism as classical symbolism, where the idea would be,
I almost got the feeling of come walk with me. Come on.
Yeah, come walk with me. There's a lot of things out here. There's going to be a lot of fertility and a lot of opportunity out here. And so, that particular piece was in response to that classical symbolism that was used during Western expansion. And in that particular piece, I've kind of shifted things a little bit to include, instead of traditionally, she would be holding something like a ream of wheat or some sort of grain. And instead, she's actually holding a pickaxe. And in the background, we can see the faint outlines of a mining operation. And so when we think about what it is, the bounty of the earth, here out west, especially in Wyoming, one of our major economic sectors has to do with resources, particularly coal and oil and things like that. And so I wanted people to think about the classical symbolism and how that can still, that kind of feeling of that they were using back during the days of westward expansion has really informed, even today, how we think about the land that we reside upon.
The last one that will show our viewers, the most surprising, based on what I had seen so far, is Bang Cafe.
Yeah, Bang was actually created as part of a collection of pieces that were meant to really illustrate some of the visuals and some of the things that are probably familiar to a number of folks who are baby boomers during a particular age in the 50s and the 60s, where there's a big cultural shift towards using the West in popular culture, in things like books and films and movies and television shows and even toys. There is a particular visual language from that era that is still recognized to this day. And so what I wanted to do in this particular piece is really highlight kind of themes that were similar to that era.
Nick, is it too early to tell what the rest of the summer and fall hold for you, as our world now is kind of trying to find its new place, if you will?
One of the strengths of being a creative is that pretty much every day that you walk into the studio, or every day that you go about your promoting your business or going and bringing your art to the world, you're essentially engaged in a form of creative problem solving. And so in that way, many creative people, I think, have a personal advantage, where they're in a mind space and they have the mental tools that they can use to adapt to an ever shifting and volatile economy, and so I will say that like it's still up in the air what we may see as far as physical exhibitions go. But I think we're coming into an age now where, because of things like physical distancing, a lot of creative people have realized that they can now, their only choice really, in many ways, is to gravitate to a more distributed kind of work environment by employing things like the internet and doing things in that nature, which is why I started doing this project with Western painter Luke Anderson, hopefully as a way to help people transition into that new space, or at least kind of show the way for, especially here in the regional West, for folks that they can find ways to exhibit their work in a way that is still meaningful and still immersive and can still touch viewers and can still provide them with the opportunities to have a sustainable career.
Nick Thornburg, it's been a pleasure for us to visit with you and to see your beautiful work. Thank you so much for joining us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you, Craig.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.